A good day to all of you and welcome back to my channel. Today let's talk about a Thomas Gray's poem, Elegy written in a country churchyard. Elegy written in a country churchyard, 1751. Thomas Gray, 1716-1771. First published in 1751, though composed around 1742 or 1750. The form of the poem is an elegiac poem written in heroic quatrains, that is 4-line stanzas in iambic pentameter with an AB-AB rhyme scheme. The tone of the poem is meditative, reflective, melancholic, moral, and universal. Now, what is an elegy in general? An elegy is a poem of mourning or reflection written to express sorrow for the dead or to meditate on themes of loss, mortality, and the passage of time. It often moves from grief to consolation, finding meaning or peace in the natural or spiritual cycle of life and death. Inspiration and the background of the poem. Thomas Gray's poem was inspired by the death of Thomas Gray's close friend Richard West in 1742. Thomas Gray was living near Stockport Churchyard, Buckinghamshire, where his mother was later buried and where he himself would rest. He was deeply affected by the death of family and friends, his own ill health, and the quiet rural landscape that invited reflection on life and mortality. The poem evolved from an intimate personal lament into a universal meditation on death, obscurity, and human equality. Explanation of the title. The term elegy traditionally refers to a poem of mourning, usually lamenting the death of an individual. However, Thomas Gray's elegy transcends this convention. It is not for one person, but for humanity itself. The title situates the poem in a country churchyard, emphasizing simplicity, peace, and universality. A place where both rich and poor alike find their final rest. Structure and divisions of the poem. The poem can be divided into 5 major sections or movements based on thematic and emotional development. Section first, the setting and mood, stanzas 1 to 4. The poem opens at a twilight. Evening descends as the curfew bell tolls and the village life slows down. The speaker stands in the quiet churchyard, observing nature's calmness and the humble graves of villages. The atmosphere is solemn and reflective, blending the stillness of nature with the silence of death. Key lines from this session, that is, the curfew tolls the knell of parting day, the lowing herd wind slowly over the lea. Key ideas in these sessions. Time's passage, evening symbolizing death, death's universality and inevitability. Nature as both a tranquil and eternal, contrasting with a mortal transience. Section 2. The lives of the villagers, stanzas 5 to 11. Thomas Gray describes the simple, rustic lives of the villagers who lie buried beneath the soil. They once plowed, labored, and lived ordinary yet meaningful lives. Their lives were uncelebrated, but their humble joys and domestic virtues gave them dignity. Key lines from this session, that is, Let not ambition mock the useful toil, their homely joys and a destiny obscure. Key ideas. Thomas Gray challenges the arrogance of the wealthy and powerful. He honors the rude forefathers of the hamlet, seeing beauty in their simplicity. The graves symbolize equality in death. All distinctions vanish in the end. Section 3, that is the vanity of ambition and fame, stanzas 12 to 20. Thomas Gray contrasts the rural poor with the mighty and ambitious. Kings, generals, poets, and politicians all meet the same fate. Death spares none. The poet reflects on unrealized potential. How many geniuses or heroes might have remained unknown in this village due to poverty and a lack of opportunity. Key lines. Full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bare. Key idea. The idea of mute, inglorious Milton's unrecognized talent due to social barriers. Death as the great equalizer. The futility of wealth, pride, and fame when confronted with immortality. Moral dignity lies in virtue, not in public glory. Section 4, that is the poet's reflection and a possible fate, stanzas 21 to 28. The poet imagines his own death and a burial among these villages. He speculates how a humble villager might one day describe him, a melancholy wanderer who loved a solitude and a contemplation. The epitaph section anticipates how he will be remembered, not as a great man, but as a thoughtful soul resigned to God's will. Key lines from this session, that is, for thee, who, mindful of the unhonored dead, dost in these lines the artless tale relate. Key ideas. Mortality is personal and collective. The poet's humility, he identifies himself with the common dead. The act of writing itself becomes a memorial. Poetry as the preservation of memory. Section 5. The epitaph, stanzas 29 to 32. The poem concludes with a self-written epitaph summarizing the poet's life and faith. It speaks of a man to fortune and to fame unknown, but rich in the faith of heaven's eternal day. The final tone is one of serene resignation, emphasizing divine mercy and a hope beyond death. Key lines from this section. Here rests his head upon the lap of earth, a youth to fortune and to fame unknown. Key ideas. Earth as a nurturing mother, acceptance of mortality, Christian faith and the soul's immortality. Now let's analyze the major themes in the poem. Mortality and the universality of death. Death spares no one. Both rich and poor share the same destiny. The churchyard becomes a democratic space, a metaphor for the leveling power of death. The next theme, the dignity of common life. The poem celebrates the moral worth of the simple, rustic villages. It honors ordinary lives often ignored by history. Social equality and humanism. Thomas Gray suggests that social class is irrelevant in the face of mortality. He condemns pride, ambition, and vanity. Unrealized potential. Many mute inglorious Miltons might have existed, talents lost due to lack of privilege. The passage of time and a transience. Evening and a nature's rhythm symbolize the inevitability of decay and a renewal. Solitude and a reflection. The poem celebrates introspection, a meditative state that connects the self with the nature and immortality. Faith and immortality. The closing epitaph implies a belief in divine justice and an afterlife beyond earthly inequality. Now let's have a look at the symbolism and imagery Thomas Gray uses in the poem. Thomas Gray's poem is rich in symbolism and a natural imagery that deepen its philosophical tone. Evening, curfew bell, twilight, etc. symbolizes the end of life, passage of time. Churchyard, the resting place of humanity, symbol of equality and reflection. Graves symbolizes silence and the anonymity of death. Plowman or farmer represents the common man's labor and dignity. Owl's complaint or rural sounds represents nature's witness to human mortality. Gem of purest ray serene symbolizes hidden talent or unrecognized virtue. Desert air symbolizes isolation and neglect. Lap of earth symbolizes death as a return to nature, the universal mother. Thomas Gray's imagery fuses pastoral simplicity with the spiritual universality, creating both a visual beauty and a moral resonance. Now let's analyze the language and the style of the poem. Form of the poem. 32 quatrains in iambic pentameter, AB rhyme, a dignified and a harmonious. Tone of the poem. Reflective, mournful, yet calm and balanced. Diction. Elevated, polished and musical, yet accessible. The literary devices used include personification, that is, for example, in the line, the lowing her wind slowly over the lea. Alliteration, as is in the line, the plowman homeward plods his very way. The use of metaphor, for example, paths of glory. Antithesis, rich versus poor, ambition versus humility. Imagery, pastoral and funeral imageries. Now let's have a look at the key arguments and philosophical insights. Death as the great equalizer. All worldly achievements, power and fame end in the grave. Value of humble virtue. The poor are not inferior in virtue or feeling, they live sincere moral lives. Critique of social inequality. The poem subtly critiques the class system, showing that moral worth is independent of wealth. Poetry as immortality. Through poetry, the memory of the forgotten dead is revived. Art gives voice to silence. Faith and a human limitation. The epitaph suggests that ultimate peace lies in acceptance of a divine will and the immortality of the soul. Now let's have a look at the critical reception of the poem. Upon its publication, the poem was immediately acclaimed. Dr. Samuel Johnson praised its moral gravity and a universal appeal. It became one of the most frequently quoted poems in English literature. Romantic poets like Wordsworth and Coleridge regarded Thomas Gray as a forerunner bridging the classical and the emotional. Now let's discuss the most important lines from the poem. The first one, the curfew tolls the knell of parting day. The line sets the somber tone of the poem, symbolizing the end of the day as a metaphor for the end of life itself. The next line, the lowing herd winds slowly over the lea. It paints a tranquil rural scene, emphasizing the peaceful rhythm of nature that contrasts with a human mortality. The next line, the paths of glory lead, but to the grave. Thomas Gray reminds us that no matter how great one's achievements, death is the inevitable equalizer for all. Full many a gem of purest rays serene, the dark and unfathomed caves of ocean bare. This metaphor suggests that many people of talent and virtue remain undiscovered, buried in obscurity like hidden jewels. The next line, some village Hampden, there with a dauntless breast, the little tyrant of his field withstood. Thomas Gray imagines that among the poor may have lived a local hero with a courage equal to great historical figure, though unknown to history. Far from the madding crowd's ignoble strife, this expresses admiration for the peaceful, simple life of the villages, untouched by the corrupt ambitions of urban society. The boast of heraldry, the pomp of power, and all their beauty, all their wealth outgave, waits alike the inevitable hour. Here, Thomas Gray reflects on the universality of death, that rank, power, and beauty cannot escape mortality's reach.